This is Accessing the Somatic Unconscious. I'm Jeannie Scholl, and our opening image is one of William Blake's, giving us a sense of so many bodies, so many beings. So initially, the discussion is going to focus around what is soma and what do we mean by somatics, because these terms are really significant as we go deeper into this field. Hannah tells us that the soma being internally perceived is categorically distinct from a body, not because the subject is different, but because the mode of viewpoint is different. It is immediate proprioception, a sensory mode that provides unique data. So what I experience as my soma may be very different from the way I'm perceived externally. It could also be different from the way I see myself in the mirror. So these are ways of noticing when our respiration, for instance, becomes very shallow, or perhaps waking from a shocking dream, and we notice we're breathing very quickly, and our heart is pounding. Those are all somatic awarenesses of the body, noticing how we are functioning internally. This can also involve our emotional state and how it again can affect our physical bodies, physical beings. Somatics, according to Hannah, is the field which studies the soma, namely the body as perceived from within by first-person perception. We'll be reading Risa Capiro's book, and she uses the term somatic to imply a first-person, here, now, all at once embodied intelligence. How we sense, feel, and know ourselves on a process level, from the inside out. So this is about self as subject, as opposed to the self we see in the mirror and the ways we might be objectified by others. This is experiencing our body from an inward perspective. First person, it gets into the felt sense, noticing maybe the tingling in your foot if you're sitting cross-legged for a long time. Or it may be, again, noticing tears welling up in your eyes as you're listening to someone's story. So what do we already know about the unconscious? Well, when we talk about dreams, Barry Williams always tells us that's what we know least about ourselves, right? Because it is unconscious. It's what tends to be repressed, hidden away. Often what is pressed down into the unconscious has been condemned, maybe through our family or our peer group or our religious congregation or culturally. And these are the aspects that we deny. They can also be too traumatic to recall, whether it happened, the trauma happened in our early teens or in our early pre-verbal history. Also, these are shadow aspects, right? Both negative and positive. So we've named a lot of the negative, that which was repressed or condemned. But there's also the positive shadow, and those may be skills or possible talents we have that are never developed because we've gotten the message that, our people don't do that, or you're not good enough to do that, or your skill level isn't high enough to attain that goal. So those become possibilities that we repress, as well, of course, as our complexes. All of this makes up the unconscious. And as Jung told us, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. So putting this together, the somatic and the unconscious, how do we find it? How do we figure it out? One way is moving the areas of our body with conscious awareness. So as I'm perhaps rolling my shoulders or shrugging my shoulders, I may notice, wow, I'm so tight there, I'm so uncomfortable. That can also happen just sitting at the computer. This tension develops, and by moving just something as simple as squeezing and releasing your shoulders, you may realize, wow, I'm holding a lot of stress there. Also, opening to sensations as they arrive, feelings as they arise, rather than feeling, oh, I've got to control it, or I don't have time to have that sensation, but being receptive. It's also about relinquishing habitual gestures. It may be that there's a habit of one foot always kind of jumping up and down unconsciously. It may be more of a tapping with your fingers on the table. But it could also be that your whole body is shifting far over to the right because of an injury you had to your left knee 10 years ago in a sports injury. So working with this to make choices, or just becoming aware of what your nonverbal communication is saying. To become more conscious of it, but not self-conscious. This isn't about, oh, now I'm going to really feel awkward because I feel like I'm supposed to be watching myself move all the time. Nor is it about watching each other move in a judgmental manner. That's not the goal. As I mentioned, just tightening the shoulders and releasing them is one possible technique we can use throughout this course as you're writing posts, to let go of some of that held stress. But there's a number of developmental patterns we'll explore. Some of these when we're together in residential. But one I'm going to introduce now is simple, but it can be a nice release. And that is like the image of the character open on the mat. So arms open wide, legs wide, even imagining your head and tailbone as appendages coming from the center. And initially maybe really stretching, fingers far away from toes, so stretching through the center, thinking of lifting your head, elongating the line from your tailbone to your head, and then releasing the tension of all that stretching into the carpet or the mat, or if you're reclining on your bed. So you kind of give into gravity there for a moment, but still feeling that openness, perhaps really noticing a more spacious feeling in your chest so your breath can go deeper. And then exhaling or closing, rolling up onto your right side perhaps, and closing in just like the figure in the illustration. And then noticing how breathing feels in this position. And contrasting that very open position to this very closed one. And noticing if there's a preference. There doesn't have to be, there may be. And then when you're ready, opening again, that big starfish feeling, expansive opening. Perhaps breathing in more deeply, sense the chest is expanded. And again, contrasting that by closing now to the other side, perhaps the right side. Drawing your appendages, hands, feet, knees, elbows, in close to your core and to your center. And then expanding open once again. And just taking a moment in this very open position to check in and see how you're feeling and what you're feeling. So as we continue, we're going to talk about some avenues of accessing the unconscious that you know about, active imagination being one. In that opening and closing movement pattern, you might just explore, what it reminds you of. Just like in dream, what are your associations with that wide open feeling and that closed, contained feeling? And you can also, with active imagination, look at any archetypes. Is there an archetype that feels very open and one that feels very contained and closed? Jung told us that, like all psychic life, the creative process stems from the unconscious. So what ways can we access this unconscious? Exploring it creatively, like we do with amplification in dreams, where we might paint the dream or move the dream or write poetry about the dream or perhaps compose music or play music in relationship to the dream. This is all possible too with the somatic unconscious. Jung assures us that there is a psyche-soma connection. He states, the separation of psychology from the basic assumptions of biology is purely artificial, because the human psyche lives in indissoluble union with the body. He also explains that the symbols of the self arise in the depths of the body, and they express its materiality every bit as much as the structure of the perceiving consciousness. So this sense of body, self, and consciousness being deeply related and not disconnected. And like dream work, finding an image for the somatic unconscious can bring it alive, can make it just more accessible, more easy to connect to than just some philosophical idea. So I invite you to find an image, whether it's with your body, perhaps it's a figure, a statue, perhaps it's a visual image, but find an image. What is the somatic unconscious for you? And just notice how it changes. Hartley tells us in somatic psychology, bringing awareness to the subtleties of bodily patterns, sensations, physical symptoms, and unconscious movements offer a particularly powerful way in accessing the lost or hidden messages of the unconscious. Lost memory, information from the unconscious about our psychological, physical, and spiritual needs, and the body's own innate intelligence and healing powers can all be accessed through deep body work and somatic movement processes. So looking at, again, how do we connect with this somatic unconscious? Dr. Green, a Jungian analyst, tells us Imaginal processing works with the images and affects that arise spontaneously out of patients' dreams, fantasies, and artistic products during the course of analysis. Embodied processing involves awareness of what the somatic unconscious is saying, with its tensions, blocks, and interruptions in the flow of energy. Although it begins with a physical sensation, it often transforms that sensation into a feeling or image, so that the border between imaginal and embodied modes of experience is blurred, at which point their reciprocal relationship becomes apparent. Both are symbolic ways of working. Each mode complements the other. So again, there's not one way that's more effective or better than the other. They're complementary. Marion Woodman certainly championed this connection between body work and analysis. She's often reported as having recommended that her analyses go for good body work. And she asserts that body work is soul work. Imagination is the bridge between body and soul. So again, what is the somatic unconscious? Starting with our beginning in Jungian psychology, Jung refers to somatic unconscious as the unconscious as experienced by the body. He spoke about the notion of the somatic unconscious and wrote, "Somewhere our unconscious becomes material, because the body is the living unit, and our consciousness and our unconscious are embedded in it. They contact the body." So again, psyche and soma are connected and contacting one another back and forth reciprocally. When we talk about the somatic unconscious, we're talking about those parts of our body that have been repressed, perhaps injured, and assaulted. These can also happen at a pre-verbal level. Thinking of the surgeries that very young children, babies in fact, may undergo, long before they have the words to process it, and so that terror is held in their bodies as they develop. Also, issues of neglect in infants, abuse of children, physical, sexual, all of this is held in the body, and sometimes completely forgotten because it's so repressed. Issues of abandonment, being left, all can come up later in relationship issues because these experiences were never consciously integrated. They were never worked with. So the somatic unconscious holds these experiences of violation that never had words put on them, that were never processed. And they are held in the body, often very rigidly, in the area in which the trauma or the abuse occurred. There's also the possibility that the somatic unconscious holds that which would be considered positive shadow. Perhaps childhood pleasures that were disallowed. It could be the delight of shared sensations with a lover who's no longer in our lives. So one way to deal with that loss is to shut down and deny that was ever positive or felt good. Also images of holding one's infant that might stir such feelings of love and positive connection. But then the child grows up, and/or in tragic situations, the baby is lost to death. So again, repression comes in, and those very sweet memories are denied or forgotten. There is this possibility of transformation through the somatic unconscious, just like transformation can come through dream work. So working with the somatic unconscious. And our quotation is, only when the spirit exists as a reality, when psychic reality is a phrase with objective meaning, stemming from a transformation of the psyche such that a felt center exists, then, and only then, does a descent into the body lead to transformation and to the experience of the somatic unconscious. So this image, again, I suggested we find an image, this image of the layers that perhaps our persona, perhaps our the way that we armor our bodies, and the different levels that it takes to become conscious and to release this unnecessary armoring or these masks that really hide our true self. Movement is a way to access the somatic unconscious. Physical, hands-on body therapy is a way to access the somatic unconscious with a registered somatic movement therapist. Authentic movement is a way of exploring the somatic unconscious. Doing movement improvisation can animate our dreams, certainly allowing us access to the unconscious. So there's so many ways that are embodied ways of getting at this part of us that has been repressed and hidden and denied, that we will begin to explore. Of course, when we talk about wholeness, as Jung did, this is part of the individuation process. And what we're working with in somatic studies is a felt sense of that wholeness. So an embodied awareness of coming into wholeness. Nothing in a body's life goes unregistered. So wholeness enters through the body's door. The threshold of consciousness is a bodily threshold, even for dreams. Without body, we cannot bring our psychophysiological experience to an emotional level of felt psychic experience, which can bridge inevitable gaps in being. So making these connections, these embodied connections with psyche, is a way of bridging that gap, of filling in those places in our being that need connection. And references are included here. Thank you for your attention. I hope this begins to stir ideas that can continue to be explored and unpacked.